Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. Bit of a 2-month kind of delay there or gap. I did take August off for the summer, but then I had to unfortunately reschedule my September podcast. So thank everyone for joining us for this one in October. Who I have with me, Alan Porter, the founder and chief content officer of the Content Pool. Alan was on the podcast before. Actually, I think it was June. And he was on before that. But he's so great to talk to and has so much information to share with us that I asked him, and he happily agreed, I hope, to come back and join us. Alan is very experienced in content strategy, content operations, content creation. He talks some of this stuff. He's done a lot of great podcasts and webinars, a couple recently, and he's on his way to LavaCon, so that's going to be good. And Alan has worked with Nuxio, with Highland, with and OpenText, all kinds of stuff. So great industry expert to have with us today. And Alan, thanks for coming back. And you have your book, which we talked about last time, will be out in May. So I'm excited to see that. Actually, that is one I think I might buy because it sounded really interesting.
Thank you. And thank you for plugging the new book that's coming out in May. Yes, it's great to be back, Bob. I really enjoy our conversations over the years and look forward to this one as well. So thanks for having me back on the podcast.
Yeah, great. I really appreciate it myself. Okay, so this time we're talking about personas, and I think we just dive right in and start with your definition of what a persona is and who needs to use it, who uses it, and why do they use it.
Okay, so you mentioned sort of some of the companies I work for, but I've also perhaps sort of more on the TechCom vendor side, but I've also spent a fair proportion of my career in the marketing world. And obviously, personas is very much come out of the marketing space, the idea of personas. If you look at the sort of strict definition of a persona in marketing, it's a fictional creation of an audience segment. It's creating a character to represent a particular audience segment. So that they, initially used by the marketing folks in terms of, who do we target our campaigns at, who are the sort of people we're trying to reach. But they actually, I think, have a broader application across the business in terms of, even from a technical publications point of view or any sort of content. One of the first things you learn about creating content is who is this content for? And I think developing personas helps us answer that question, that when we're sitting down to develop a piece of content, is who is this for and what do we expect them to do with it? And one of the ways to sort of try and do that is to, if you like, narrow down the audience segment into shared behaviors or shared interest or shared problems to solve. And that's where developing personas can help, I think.
I think I definitely know them from a marketing perspective, but I have seen so many different ways of building personas. Some just make me wonder, they go way too deep, I guess, is maybe what, in my perspective anyway. So I just kind of, I know you said you explain why they're good to do. Is there a difference between creating a persona for like an ICP or an ideal customer profile versus creating a persona for an audience? Like, do you need it for the same reasons?
Yeah, you could have them for the same reasons. I actually want to go back and pick up on your point about personas going deep. If I have an issue with the development of personas, is going back to that definition of it being a fictional construct of an audience segment, is sometimes people get hooked into the fictional bit way too much. I think I sent you a copy, but I have an article I wrote several years ago that's proved very popular, which is called, when personas go wrong, the search for fluffy. And the basic story there is, I was at a conference where somebody set up this presentation and talked about how they'd spent like 3 days looking for the picture of a kitten that their persona that they were developing would have owned and stuff like that. And they went off and they were the lady who was presenting it worked for a food company, a consumer goods food company. And they were basically trying to build a persona around people who needed to make meals in 30 minutes, were on a limited budget and so forth. And they were trying to put recipes together, and they developed this persona, and they had spent I don't know how long, developing this persona of this single mom with a kid age 4 who, did this and did that and had a cat and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's taking it too far, because I have this thing that if you develop a persona that's based around a too well defined individual, you
Mhm.
end up implicitly excluding a large percentage of your audience. My response to her was, that's great, but what happens if you're a working dad, you married, but you're a working dad who does the cooking, and what you're trying to sell applies equally to that person as it does to the single mom.
Yeah.
Or the student who has 3 jobs and is bouncing between jobs and they need to cut something, they're on a budget and they need to cut something in 30 minutes. There are so many other people that you're excluding, or implicitly excluding, that could be your target audience for the task. So I'm a big proponent of task-based personas, which I think differs more in terms of that ideal customer profile, because again, that ideal customer profile can end up being anthropomorphizing somebody who doesn't exist, as opposed to trying to figure out a persona based around the fact that somebody has a particular task or a particular problem to solve, and then how can we massage our information, or how can we create content to help them do that thing or solve that problem, or get them through that task. So yeah, I think there is a different, I think we've sort of got to the point where there has become a difference between an ideal customer profile and a persona, in the fact that personas generally, have ended up being these fictional characters, which is not what I think we should be doing. I think we should be looking at a task, like I said, a task-based persona. I've been in too many companies where I walked in and they've got pictures on the walls of our persona, or I've been in meetings where they say, well, this will work for Bill and this will work for Susan and this will work for Jamal. And I'm like, you're just bringing your own biases into that conversation, because in your head, Bill's a 40-year-old guy who plays golf. He's a 40-year-old white guy who plays golf.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a 25-year-old black female executive who has exactly the same problem, but you're not presenting your information in a way that would appeal to her. So that was a very long and complicated rambling answer.
But that made me realize, like, how, when we actually do that, when we build a persona that way and say, hi, here's Barb, she's a white woman married with 3 kids,
Right.
this is her job, these are the things that interest her, we're actually introducing bias into our personas. And I, to be honest, I didn't really think about that, but that's true. When you start explaining it, it's like, yeah, like, why wouldn't it be an Indian person or a black person or a man, or like, if we can't cover all those different scenarios, so why would we build our persona to be one type of person, I guess.
Yeah. So for me, a more successful persona is, an electrical, what we're doing is an electrical engineer who has to format, no, it's not the word I'm looking for. An electrical engineer who has to scope the power requirements of a new building. Yeah. That's for me is more of a good persona, as opposed to the, we need to go out and find a picture of the kitten for the single mom,
Yeah. So like a job to be done type persona.
Yeah. It's a role and a job or a task or that needs to be done, and sort of build it. Like I said, what I like to call those task-based personas, rather than like I say, outside of work, I write fiction as well, and for me, that's where the made-up characters belong, is in my fiction, not necessarily in the day job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we know that we should focus more on task-based roles to build personas. The other thing that I thought you said was interesting was, a lot of companies or marketing or whatever group it is doing this will take more of an inside out approach to how they create that persona. And that means they're building the persona the way they think it should work, as opposed to talking to a customer and building the persona that way.
Yeah, very much so. I find that with a lot of companies I talk to is, the personas are created by somebody in marketing, or, somebody in TechCom, or whoever, or in the content done. But you're right, it tends to be done. a bunch of marketing folks get in a conference room together and they get the whiteboard and the sticky notes and they're like, oh, we're going to, define our personas. And again, when they walk into that conference room, they're bringing their own biases, they're bringing their own culture, they're bringing their own implied experience into that. So we end up with this, like I said, this inside out view of what we believe a persona could be. And even if we go to a task-based aspect, we still tend to do that. We bring in those personal experiences of what that task is and how it's solved. And if we've got a problem, we were going to naturally bias towards the fact that our problem can, the way we do it can solve it. Just to give an example, when I was in the construction, working for a manufacturer in the construction industry, we built our customer journey around the fact that we knew there was, the persona was, what does a site manager on a construction site? We were looking at what a site manager on a construction site doing, and we sat down in the room and we were like, okay, what's the typical day of a site manager? And we mapped it out. And I think we mapped it out into about 20 stages, 20 things that we felt there might, and there was like 8 things in that 20 that we could go, oh yeah, we can help here, we can help here, we can help here. When we actually got out on the site and started talking to actual site managers on the job site, we found that in a typical day, generally, we could map to 32 distinct actions during the day.
Wow.
And there was about 16 of those where we could actually help. But because we were initially bringing our point of view, we were bringing in a very narrow point of view based on what we knew from interacting with customers at a distance, as opposed to actually being on the job site, getting muddy boots, talking to the guys and gals who actually run the site, who run a job site, and what their day job involves. So yeah, it's much better if you can actually get out and talk to customers where the customers work, or just watch them, or you can build much better personas there, and then you can start to see issues that you're not going to think about while you're sitting in a conference room with a bunch of sticky notes and whiteboards, and that can come down to practical issues, but it can come down to language issues. It can come down to, physical environmental issues that you're not going to think about. So yeah, you get a lot more if you can take that outside in point of view. And to do that, you really need to get out. I know companies don't particularly want you traveling and being out and about these days, because we're all doing stuff like this on Zoom or, online meetings and stuff, which is great and really helps. But nothing beats actually getting out there with the customer and seeing the environment that they're involved in to solve the sort of tasks that you're trying to build personas for.
What happens if you can't, though? Like, what happens if you can't be boots on the ground where the customer is, walking them through? Is there something else you can do that will give you a better persona?
You can still talk to the customers. You can still do Zoom meetings, talk to them, focus groups, even just, it's going to may sound silly, but getting out on things like YouTube and seeing, or talk to customers and say, hey, well, what self-help videos do you watch? What's the best place to do things? Again, just going back to the job in the construction industry, we got the thing from on high that oh, we need a YouTube video that's gonna go viral. If we knew how to do that, we wouldn't have a day job. But CEO's like, I want something that's going to go viral. What do you mean by viral? So we ended up doing a very flashy, nice, fun video that did in fact end up getting his million hits, which to him was a tick in the box. But it wasn't our most popular video. The most popular video turned out to be one on how to basically park your bulldozer overnight so you didn't damage it. And from a persona point of view, even if you can't get out and talk to the guys on the ground, we could look at those metrics and go, well, okay, those are the sort of tasks that appeals to our customer. That's the things that they want to know. Maybe we should build a marketing persona around, equipment maintenance or equipment care, stuff like that. So even if you can't actually get out and get your feet on the ground, you can do that virtually. You can have the conversations. For God's sake, don't send out surveys. Because nobody ever responds to surveys, and even when they do, most companies don't actually act on the information that comes out of surveys, and people are fed up of surveys. Again, that's just somebody checking a box. Yes, we've done captured voice of the customer. We send out a survey on the bottom of every receipt. Surveys are also self-fulfilling in the fact that only people who've got something to say will actually respond to them. So first step is probably, if you can talk directly to get out on with the customers. If you can't do that, talk to them and find out what they're doing. And if you can't do that, talk to the people who talk to the customers. If you're in tech doc and you can't talk to the customers directly, because in some organizations, unfortunately, technical documentation tends to be very siloed and remote from the customers, talk to the sales engineers, talk to the sales guys, talk to the people who handle invoicing, the people who actually have direct contact with the customers, and get them to tell you customer stories. Storytelling is a great way to capture that information as well and bring it back in and help you build a more realistic persona. As I said, we said the good, bad, and the ugly. For me, the ugly is, and I've been in these rooms where, you go into a meeting and there's an empty chair in the meeting, and somebody, what's the empty chair? Oh, well, that's Bill's, our mythical persona's chair, and it's his virtual presence at this marketing meeting. And it's like, yeah, don't do that. Talk to people, go out, find out what they're doing, and then you can find out what the tasks are that they're trying to do, and then you can build those task-based personas around it and build the right sort of content to deliver to that.
So that was a question I had then, because if we're going task-based, you obviously have more than one persona that you're building.
Yes, definitely. You don't necessarily need a persona for every task. If you've got manuals that have got, 1,000 tasks in it, you're not going to have 1,000 personas, but you're going to be able to build at least, some that, like I said, are around, a role or a group of roles together, and it can be a very high level task. Like I said, scoping electricity supply for a building could be one, but there's probably going to be 100 tasks within that to actually get to that point of view. But just understanding that overall aim that somebody's working for can help. But yeah, you definitely need more than one. If you've only got one persona, then you're only really looking at one section of your potential market.
Right.
So, like I say, I most of the companies I've dealt with tend to have at least 4 to 6 personas that they develop.
And are those kind of maybe covering different departments, or are they all, like, would you have 4 or 5 for marketing? Because how would you then build a web presence that speaks to all of them?
It's 4 or 5, not necessarily for departments, but 4 or 5 that are based around what it is that what the problems are that the company solves.
Okay.
You don't want to do it on a functional basis. You don't want to have a technical publications persona different from a marketing persona, different from, a customer support support. Unfortunately, when you deal with a lot of companies, you can very quickly tell on a lot of company websites, you can very quickly tell what are the siloed functions. And the best thing is if your interaction with the company is a holistic one, and the company takes a holistic view of the customer as well, that it helps them drive them on that customer journey and customer interactive, irrespective of which department they're dealing with. Because we as customers don't deal with departments, we deal with a brand, we deal with a company.
Right.
And your personas really should help with that, in the fact that if you develop a persona around, we need to set something up for this particular job and this particular task, then how do each of those functional groups within our company help actually solve those problems, and how can they contribute to solving those problems?
So if they're cross company, who should really build the persona? Who should be responsible for creating them?
It should be a cross-functional team that builds them. It should be and who should be responsible for them? Actually, that's a good question. I tend to think it should be the customer experience group, whatever that is. And there are some companies that everybody's responsible for customer experience, and that's true. But if you have a distinct customer experience group, I think they should own the personas more than, say, marketing folks or tech doc or anybody else. I think because they're the people who should ideally have that more holistic view of the customer experience, customer journey.
Yeah. And if you have a marketing team that maybe has a broader role across the company where, they do the full life cycle type
Right.
marketing, maybe they could probably do a good job of it.
Yeah.
Because they look at it across everything as well.
Yeah. Yeah. If somebody's got that holistic view, then yes, that's ideal.
Okay. And so one of the bad things I've seen about personas is that they're built once and then they're never looked at, or they're never looked at again. Like how do you advise companies to keep them up to date? Like, don't just one and done and say, oh, that's my persona for the next 5 years until I do a company update or something.
Yeah, building personas should not be a project. It should be a process. It should be something where you are actually just constantly looking at what's happening in the industry that you're in, looking at how your customers interact and work. The speed that new technologies arrive and get adopted now, you've got to be constantly looking at how your customers are adopting those, how they're using them in their job. Major shift, just before we went live, you and I were talking about COVID, just the massive change 4 years ago in the way that we all work.
Yeah.
You've got to keep on top of that sort of stuff. So it's really got to be a constant thing. I'm not necessarily saying you have to sit down and change them every week, but you should be looking at, what's happening in your industry, what's happening with your customers, what's happening in the world, how does that impact them, and maybe look at them, if not every 6 months, at least once a year, look at doing an update. But it should be something where you're collecting information all the time, and then maybe, you roll stuff out, like I say, on an annual basis. So if not more frequently.
Do you think that AI can play a role in helping you kind of build them and keep them up to date? I always love to ask the AI question these days.
Yeah, it depends what you mean by AI. It's such a catch-all term.
Yeah, that's true.
In terms of where I think and I've seen it help, is where AI is really good at doing things like pattern matching. So like I say, if you're collecting a lot of data, a lot of analytics about your customers, or even things about their environment that they work in, and you've just got a large amount of data to sift through and figure out the pattern. I think AI is really good at that sort of thing, of going through and doing the pattern matching at a speed and a scale that we as human, and a level of quality that we as humans can't go through and do that. So that I think in terms of the sort of the data analytics, one of the problems with data analytics and just the focus on just pure data is, data shows us what's happened in the past. The fact that somebody, a customer clicked something 27 times means they clicked it 27 times at points in the past. Generally, we don't know why they did that. But if you've got a large enough amount of data, AI can help you do that pattern matching of, they're clicking it 27 times at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we can start asking those questions as to, what's going on, or, we're seeing stuff around a certain release, or, when the weather changes, we're seeing certain changes in behavior. So, AI can help us do that pattern matching and help us make some of those connections that can then help build in answer that why question as to why people are doing what they're doing. So that side of AI, I think, definitely has a play. Using generative AI to create a persona, no. No.
Christopher Penn of Trust Radius, or not Trust Radius, Trust Insights, sorry, has a process that he uses Gen AI to help him generate your ICPs, which I thought was really interesting and very, very, really cool to do. I think you could maybe then take that and figure out what are your task-based personas out of those people. I think kind of a nice approach.
Anything with Gen AI, I've just been a Luddite about Gen AI. I will say that up front. I've worked on other AI projects, but I'm not a particular fan of Gen AI, because I don't think it's mature enough, anywhere near mature enough for business applications yet. But taking it, like I said, I think what I've seen is where I've seen Gen AI used to create personas, it's going into that fictional.
Yeah. And we don't want that. Yeah.
An individual type thing, like creating a character in a novel or whatever. And we don't want to be doing that, I don't believe. But if you're looking for some ideas, then there, it could be a way to start, so you're not got the blank sheet of paper, and then extrapolate from that and work from it and apply your experience, the customer's experience and stuff, and figure out the tasks that they're trying to solve. And again, that could be where AI could be useful from a pattern matching point of view. If you're seeing a certain number of things in the customer support desk coming in, or a certain number of inquiries coming in, there's a certain trends in the self-help portals. Then you can start to see, oh, we've got an issue here. Maybe we can build a task-based persona about trying to solve that particular problem, because we're seeing a lot of people do that. Nothing drives me madder than getting on with a customer service rep, or you ask a question about a company and somebody goes, oh, everybody asks that. Well, if everybody asks it, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
And you should be building a task-based persona to solve that problem if a large percentage of your customers are asking the same question. So, yeah.
All right. How do you ensure you've gone through the work of building these personas and you've shared them? How do you make sure that people are actually applying them in the work that they do?
That's a good question. How can you be sure that anybody's actually following any process?
I know.
To be honest, I think the best way of any of those things is through social reinforcement. Is when people are turning stuff in or they're looking at stuff, you just ask the question, hey, how does this fit with solving that particular problem for that? How is this going to help that electrical engineer do this job and scope that building? And just keep asking those questions. And as you build content and information around those personas, it's like, oh, did you use the information that we've got to do that? I think the worst thing you can do for a lot of things is to say thou shalt or you must, because then people will not.
Yeah.
If you can actually show people the benefit of doing that, and how it probably actually helps increase audience engagement, or how it actually reduces support calls, then I think you can get people to start to do it. Again, whenever I walk in the conference room and I see here's our 4 pictures of our 4, here's Bill, Ted, Alice, and whatever on the wall, and it's like, thou shalt use these, and these. People will just push back against it. So,
maybe you could, and I know you don't like generative AI, but you can build your task-based persona, create your content, and you can load your persona into the AI and say, tell me now, does this thing that I've created or thing that I've done support the persona that I've built? That's
a way of doing that.
Yeah. All right. If when you go into a company and you talk to them about building personas, is there like a process that you start with, or something that you do, a step-by-step approach that you take to build the persona?
Generally, it comes back to it is actually asking a very basic question of like, what business problem are this? Pretty much any engagement around anything comes back to the basic question of what business problem are you trying to solve?
Right.
What is the issue that you're trying to solve? That could be something like, we don't have market penetration in a particular area we want to do, or we're launching a new product we think is going to, appeal to a new audience. How do we do that? To, we're looking at doing campaigns. To, on the sort of more on the technical side, things like, we're seeing an increase in problems around X, or, we're getting feedback that such and such a process is frustrating, or so it really comes down to that. And then, I really do like to say, well, let's figure out where we think we are, So yeah, we do sort of do the let's sit in the room and do the sticky, the sticky note exercise, but with the realization that what we're going to come out of that is a foundation to start asking questions around. It's not the end product.
Yeah.
And we're not going to put names on it. We're not going to put fancy names on it. We're going to make it task-based. And then take that actually out to the customers, either virtually or really, and then field test it, and do it that way. Yeah.
I like it because, especially, I mean, I get it from the marketing side too, but also in the technical documentation side, when you're creating all that content to support products and stuff, if you're looking at it from a task-based perspective, you can certainly see how you can create that content better, because you're not writing. You might write content for an administrator versus an end user, but those end users have different roles in the company and they use the product in different ways for different reasons. So task-based personas make so much more sense.
Yeah. I mean, that is part of the reason I like to push it, is because different people use your products in different ways. When you're writing documentation, we tend to think of somebody's going to do the same thing all the time, but they won't.
Yeah.
And again, that depends on their background, the influences they've got, their own biases, the technology, how familiar they are with the technology. Are they new? Are they not? Some of the most basic personas can just be around product experience level. Is this somebody who needs every piece of information and is a trainee, or is it somebody who's moderately comfortable, or are they an expert with the product? The task-based persona, that's some very basic task-based persona mapping. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We've covered a lot of stuff, but what I want to do is kind of a rapid fire. It's going to be going back a little bit, but because we talked about, we're going to cover the good, bad, and the ugly of building personas. Let's just kind of do a rapid fire of what are the good parts of building a persona.
Good parts about building a persona is it gets you thinking about the customer. It gets you thinking about the people who use your products, the way they use them, and the context within which they use them. Even if you're doing the fictionalized person one, again, which I don't like, but at least it gets you thinking in terms of what is it the customer needs. Yeah.
Okay. And then the bad part?
When you become too focused on what you think the customer needs and you don't you think that's the end of the process, is you've created something that you think is a representation of the customer. The bad part is not going and talking to the customers to find and field testing it and making sure it's right.
Okay. And then the ugly part, the really ugly part of it.
The really ugly part is the 3 days looking for a picture for a kitten for a fictionalized single mom of a 4-year-old child. Because what got me there was, she talks about the 3 days it took to find this picture. How many customer interviews could they have done in that 3 days?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, this was great, Alan. Great conversation. Really, definitely, I came into it thinking ICP-based personas and, the people. But I definitely really like the perspective of task-based and working with that kind of persona.
For me, if you are working with the fictionalized characters type personas, you've got personas with profiles and names and stuff, just think about who you're excluding by doing that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. My last question, because you know me, I like to ask an off topic.
Yeah, sure.
You have written a lot of books and articles and other types of content. What is your process to get past the blank page and actually get started writing?
That's funny you should ask that, because you mentioned my new book earlier. I just turned in the manuscript to the publishers this week, so that's done and gone. So I now have and I basically have a contract to write a short story for an upcoming anthology, and I am literally at the blank page thing. Other than the fact that I know what the subject of the anthology is, and I have a vague idea of the story I want to tell, I am literally at the blank page side. So my process for that is to sort of try and steep myself in the subject area. So I'll say this is actually a short story for an anthology of Tales of the Musketeers. I already I've already been in one Musketeers anthology. This is a second volume. So I am watching a lot of Three Musketeers movies and cartoons, and just generally trying to soak into the ambiance of what it is I need to write about. And I do know at some point something will click. There'll be like a throwaway line in something, or I'll read something. I'm also looking at researching the history of the real life D'Artagnan. There actually was a real life D'Artagnan.
Okay.
So I'm looking into his history, see if there's something might just click there. So yeah, when I've got a blank page, I really just tend to not think about the fact I have a blank page, but just start to try and get myself into the mind space of whatever it is I'm writing on. So I read around it, watch stuff around it, go for walks, think about it, and knowing at some point something will just click and I'll get that opening line.
So. Sometimes for me, that opening line comes in the middle of the night.
Oh yeah, my wife and I were just talking about that this morning, actually, because she's working on she's a writer too. She's working on a second novel in a series, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I was thinking of this last night." I'm like, "Why don't you keep a notebook?" And she's like, "No, because I think about the book to help me go to sleep, and if I keep a notebook, I'll have to sit up and write it down." So yeah.
All right. Well, this is great. Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time today. And you're off to LavaCon, right?
Yes, I am. I'm looking forward to being in Portland this next week and catching up with everybody and meeting some new folks too. It's always a good conference. It's one of my must-attend conferences every year. I always really enjoy it. And it's always a lot of good industry trend discussions and information exchange. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of really good things about it. And Ingenix is a sponsor. So yeah, I think that's one of the conferences to be at for people in content operations, content strategy, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. And a thank you to our sponsor. Ingenix is our sponsor for the last 6 years. And now we're kind of shifting the sponsorship to Discover CX by Ingenix, which is just a product line for the Ingenix company. And I just want to invite you to go over and check out discovercx.com. That's solutions for customer support, customer experience, portals, tech doc support, and all that kind of great stuff. I think I would really love it if you kind of check that out over there. And I know Ingenix would as well. And please sign up for our newsletter so we can let you know everything that's coming up in the next few months as we wind up the sixth year, a sixth season of the podcast. And wow, December's coming fast. I don't think I like that, but anyway, thanks everyone. Have a great day. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.